Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of First Impressions, where we get to dive into the tech that we all as publishers need to be looking at. And today I've got Bosco from Optable, who's going to be walking us through really a number of different aspects of this. I think one of the things that I'm excited about with this conversation has been the clean room conversation has evolved from a piece of tech to a strategy. And Bosco, I'm hoping today you can kind of talk us through a little bit of that so we can, 2024 is around the corner and the world's about to change. And I think it's time people have some idea of exactly how they're going to address that. So Bosco, thanks for joining.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to getting into this with you
Yeah.
and your audience.
So let's dive in. Why don't you talk again? I think again, even like the language around clean rooms has evolved. I even think the language around optimal has evolved as you've been out and again you're involved with the IAB. I see you all over the place. You guys are shaking it up and making things happen. So why don't you talk that through and then let's kind of go through some of the issues around clean rooms and then let's talk about strategies for publishers kind of going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're totally right. I mean, the conversation around clean rooms is evolving. I think there was this kind of period at the beginning where we're all and everyone's really fascinated by the technology and what it enables, and a lot of the talk has been around the tech and what you could do with it. Um, One of the things at Optable that we've been focused on really since the get-go is not so much clean rooms themselves, but really how to use them to enable growth for publishers. And for us, we see data collaboration and more specifically direct data collaboration between publishers that own and operate first-party data and media and brands and agencies on the buy side. We see this as an enabler of growth. And so that's really what we've been focused on at Optable. And for us, clean rooms are a means to get there. They, in particular, to ensure the security and privacy of the data contributed by the collaborating parties, clean room tech is used to do that. It's used to do that by limiting the information that's exchanged between the parties, offering controls and auditability of the various, joint data operations that have to happen. But really, the problem with clean rooms as a technology is that they can be pretty costly to build. Especially, if you consider that not every company platforms and stores their most precious data assets on every cloud or every data warehouse, right? So governance and administration is expensive, and not to mention that each environment requires a separate build. Our approach at Optable is to make it easy for publishers of all sizes and levels of sophistication to leverage data collaboration to grow their business. And they can do that with our platform because we've streamlined the workflows and automated data movement between cloud cleanroom environments. So when it's required to support collaboration with partners that might not be platformed on the same cloud or warehouse that you're using, um, you know, to avoid having to do all these builds and data movement yourself, we've automated that whole process. So to make data collaboration really scale for advertising, we've had to make it really simple and easy to do the common things you want to be able to do frequently with your partners. Like, for example, you might want to compare an audience, activate an audience overlap, augment overlapping user data. Maybe you want to model and activate lookalike audiences built from overlapping user data. These are the advertising use cases that we found help enable growth. So it's not just about analytics and BI. While measurement and analytics and BI are an important use case or category of use cases for clean rooms, in order to have growth, you need to be able to activate. You need to be able to model. So those are the things we've really focused on making easy with Optable. And I'd love to show you some of it today.
Yeah, let's. I have a couple of questions off what you just covered. Again, that was one of the most concise and like direct part. That was really good, Bosco. But I want to untangle. You know me, I want to tangle things up
For
and go.
sure.
So first of all, one of the things I'll just share with everyone that's watching is that phrase data collaboration is the first I was from Optimal and hearing that from James talking about that, right? And part of it, what I really liked was it helped me understand in talking with some other publishers about going out to market with a data collaboration strategy, not a clean room strategy, right? Even in the way you talked about it, you're like, it is a piece of tech that is trying to accomplish something. It is not the end goal. The end goal here is to not have a clean room. The end room is to use a piece of technology to accomplish that, and that is working with these particular pieces. So I think that that's like a really important part. One of the things I think that I know people think about when you talk about the fact that Optable has this capability for doing activation. Can you dive into that? And if this is covered in the demo, let's get to the demo. But there's this aspect of going like a lot of clean rooms went out at the start and said, you can analyze and get match rates, and then you can discuss and decide how to buy. And Optimal comes along and says, yeah, okay, great. You want to do that, but you also want to be able to activate, you want to be able to target and so forth. And there's an aspect of that that is like the what a clean room does and activation. Help me make sure I understand how a clean room allows me to activate without sharing of personal data in a way that like makes sense so I can kind of go like internally, we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think, this activation thing is a really big point of confusion for a lot of people in industry. And, when you look at it from the perspective of clean rooms, you generally use a clean room to do some sort of joint data operation. And then when you're done with it, you think about, okay, well, how can I now activate the result of this collaboration? So think of the simple use case where you have a publisher with an audience and a brand coming along with their list of loyalty members or customers, and the brand's basically interested in retargeting these users within the publisher's environment. That might happen through a match, right? Like a pretty simple, actually, deterministic match, maybe matching on email data, let's say, to keep things simple. The result of that match, somebody has to activate it. And usually, like, the way the activation works is completely separate to what happens in the clean room. A lot of what we're seeing is that there are alternative IDs flowing through the bid stream, for example, that publishers inject that enable then activation through a DSP. Now, the problem with that is that, if you're a publisher, you're using a clean room to prevent data leakage, right? But the moment that you're then also injecting an ID into the bid stream, you're basically giving up, the control of how that information is used inside of the DSP. And so when we looked at activation, especially from the perspective of a publisher, we really try to enable ways of activating overlapping audiences and even modeled audiences right from the publisher's side, right? So that in a way where the publisher doesn't actually need to inject IDs if they don't want to. I mean, they can still do that, of course, because those IDs might still be useful for other reasons, right? Programmatic ad revenues, for example, situations where there's an indirect, kind of buying that's happening through programmatic channels. But in the case where you have a direct relationship with a brand or a buyer, and you're leveraging your most precious first-party data assets, you want to be able to activate the result of your collaboration in a way where you don't have to actually leak out individual user level or device level information through the bid stream. And so that's one of the things we built right into the system is the ability to do that right out of the system. And because of that, when I show it to you in a moment, you'll see that there are a bunch of functions in the system that actually have a lot to do with collaboration, but they're kind of peripheral to collaboration itself in the sense that they help you, for example, stitch together user data, build audiences, and then be able to activate those audiences as cohorts, whether you're doing that inside your ad server or in your ad exchange seat. So these are the kinds of things that we think are really important. And when they work well, they're sort of invisible. You just flip some switches and it just sort of happens. And the kind of the underlying details don't matter as much.
Got it. Yeah, I think one last thing, and then I'd love for you to start to demo, right? Is that data leakage issue is something I look at this as a moment in time when publishers can sit there and say, we no longer just have to accept data leakage. It's something we gave up a long time ago. I don't know who was the first to break the line, right? And go like, you know what? You can just have our data. But someone did it, and then we all just followed suit, and it's like our data and whatever. Especially as we get to this idea of identifiers, right? If I've got someone's email address, in one sense, long term, that is more valuable than a third party cookie. Cookies get cleared and don't get replaced easy. Email addresses, again, if I've got a good one, a valid one, and people relog in, all that history suddenly comes back. And then they just give that away as a problem. And so I think there's this aspect that I just want to make sure that like publishers are thinking about this, that data collaboration tools like Optable are going to help you monetize your audience, but it's also going to sit there and create a new dialogue about your audiences in which you get to say, yeah, we'll let you target, but we're not giving it away. And I feel like that's I just want to make sure maybe they're all there. Yeah, I don't think they're all, but I would just love to get to that point where people just sit there and go, this audience we hold dear and hold back on and so forth. So I think that's
No, you're
important.
totally right, Robin. Like the thing I want to add to that is that, there's several reasons to protect your user information, right? The user information that you get from users that interact with you directly as a publisher. Like one of those is privacy, right? It's in your interest to protect the privacy of those users. Because you have a relationship with them, and the cost of damaging that relationship to you and your business is disproportional, to the cost of some third party or middleman downstream, abusing their privacy. That's one reason. But the other really important reason you just talked about, which I don't think gets enough mention in industry, and it's really as a publisher, there's a strategic reason, right? You don't want data leakage because data leakage commoditizes you and devalues your offering. So the fact that you're able to get trust from an end user, you know, that comes with a responsibility to protect that end user's privacy, but it also gives you, to your point, an unfair advantage. And if you go ahead and make that data available at large in the bid stream, you're giving up some of that advantage.
100%. And I appreciate that. I think that that's again something where there's more nuance to this and more of this conversation for us to have. But hey, listen, I'm the guy that is always saying I want to see things, I want to be able to visualize it. For all the theoretical, I always like to see a good user interface, and I like to sit there so I can start to put this into my world. So, why don't you walk us through some things that you've prepared, and I'd love to make sure we kind of cover those points.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I love living on the edge, as you know, so I'm gonna just go in and show you a live demo. And I won't do an exhaustive demo because I don't think we have the time, but I do want to highlight a few things that I think are important to understand, when you work with us. So the first thing is this screen here that you're looking at now. So this screen is what we call an optable collaboration node, and it belongs to a publisher. This publisher is called MediaCo. Obviously, it's a fake publisher with fake data for demo purposes. But this is very much the kind of interface that you would interact with as a publisher when you're using Optable. And what you're looking at specifically here is your identity graph. And right away, what you can see is that there's not just one ID here. There's many different ID types. There are person level ID types and household level ID types. These are IDs that are known in industry. So in some cases, they're things like email addresses and phone numbers, maids, mobile ad IDs to the extent that you collect those, IP addresses of different kinds, even CTV ad IDs. And in other cases, you can also bring in your own IDs. So IDs that are kind of local to your universe that are useful in deduplicating user and household level data within your universe. So things like a PPID, right, like a publisher provided ID. If you use a DMP or a CDP, those will likely set kind of first party IDs on your users, which you'll likely want to bring in and connect to your Optable instance. And fundamentally, what you're working with inside of Optable is your private identity graph, right? So this is your data. It's the data that you have on your users and, in some instances, the households of those users. You can, of course, use identity resolution services from third party companies, and in some instances, we actually partner with these companies, so you can augment your own ID graph data with data from third parties. Fundamentally, though, what you're working with is yours, and we're not going to, for example, augment your data without your consent or without your instruction, for example, nor is this data ever connected to anyone else's data out of the box, right? So it's only going to be connected through actions that you take inside of our platform, which I'll show you, in a few minutes. The other thing you might notice here is that your data contains various different types of identifiers on users, and we call like the atomic kind of data record inside our system, we call it a cluster. Why a cluster? Because in general, a single user cluster might contain one or more IDs, right? So at a minimum, you'll identify a user or a visitor on your website, for example, with an ID, with one ID, but you could, in some instances, have more information and more identifying information on those users, like an email address or phone number, in which case, some of those clusters will have additional IDs linked to them. And you can see these little percentages here across the top. They indicate the percentage of your cluster records that contain at least one ID of a given type. So in this case, for MediaCo, there's 69% of the records that have at least one email address associated with them. And then across the bottom here, what you can see are various different attributes that you might have on your users. So again, these are attributes that you yourself own. They belong to you. You might have acquired them through a licensing arrangement with a third party, or you might have collected them directly from within your environment. And these are all attributes that might be relevant to you when you collaborate with partners. For example, when you're looking at overlapping audiences, you might be interested in understanding those overlaps in terms of these attributes. They might also be useful to you in building audiences, which is something that you can also do in our system. Now, the other thing I want to mention about this is that some publishers that we work with have already stitched together their data assets into kind of a private identity graph like what you see here. And in those cases, integration is very, very simple, right? We have this concept of sources, and you can bring in your ID graph data from any number of different sources. And if you've already got it all stitched together, likely you'll just have one source. And then when you pull up this insight screen, you'll basically see a kind of visualization of the data that is coming in through that source. But also what we often run into are scenarios where publishers have a number of different systems internally. Like they might have a DMP with some user data sitting inside of it. They might have a CRM with some other user data sitting inside of it. And they might have a data warehouse, right, with other user data that their engineering team, for example, is building and maintaining on users. And in order to collaborate effectively, they kind of need to stitch all of this together. And so that's one of the things we've automated. When you plug in these different source types and you bring in user data from different sources, there's an entity resolution module that joins together and deduplicates this data. So I'll give you a simple example. Like imagine that you have a CRM, and in that CRM, you have an email address and some attributes associated with the user. And perhaps in your CDP, you also have an email address for some of your users. You might have, a CDP user ID in that system. And maybe you'll also have other types of IDs linked to that CDP user ID and other attributes. Well, you can plug both of these things in through different sources. And to the extent that you have user records that share an email address, they're just automatically going to get merged into a single cluster. And this behavior, this entity resolution behavior, is actually tunable. So you can actually influence how the stitching happens, which IDs are used to merge records, and which IDs are not used to merge records, but can be shared actually by multiple records. So this is something that you can configure. So I'm showing this, and I'm spending a bit of time here because I think it's kind of foundational to effective collaboration. A lot of people will look at a clean room And they'll say, oh, great, I'll just plug some data in and then I can match it. Well, if you want to do that effectively at scale, generally the first thing you have to do is bring all your user data together. And so we've automated, a big part of that process.
And one of the key things I think that I've heard people get caught up on has been that it is the email address that is the key. And what think I've learned from you and what I'm hearing is uh, it is not the only key. And part of that's part of what your system is kind of automating is the fact that again I could be working with an ID5, I could be working with UID, I could be have phone numbers, I can have all these different things, and you're going to sit there and help pull that stuff together, and then out of that I get a picture again of what I'm able to kind of then do and match against all that, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So ID5 is actually a great example to talk about because they're a probabilistic ID that can be used for matching and direct collaboration, um, including on users that where you might not have an email address. I think that's pretty interesting because people tend to think of clean rooms and direct collaboration as being something that's only relevant to identified user data, which is true. It is relevant for identified user data, but with identity resolution providers like ID5, you can actually make it usable and relevant for anonymous user data as well.
I want to build on that because I think you just unlocked something in my head about this that I hadn't really thought about. There has definitely been a time at the beginning of this that clean rooms and that matching level was actually problematic, right? Because if the worst thing I'd want to do is have my top client come to me with their email list and I do a match against it, and let's just say it's a 6% match, and suddenly it's like, wait, what's going on here? Now, first of all, a good publisher is able to turn something like that into opportunity. Wow, look, 93, 94% of your audience we don't have connected. Let's go that direction. Okay, that takes some salesmanship, but there's a part of it of moving the conversation toward again, who are you trying to reach? And if I can use these other identifiers, again, the conversation allows us to inject publisher first party data into a place that has not been utilized as much. There's resistance from the buy side to use publisher first party data. They don't trust it. But if they're going through
Yeah.
this exercise, there's an aspect of going like, all right, well, let's talk about the levers. Let's talk about the fact that we do match this level. We can project off that the next aspect of level. Like there's again, this a conversation that kind of moves it toward let's do business as opposed to, aha, I'm grading your homework. You don't know your audience. Therefore, I want to
Yeah.
lower CPM. I honestly just there's something in the way you said that that kind of helped me sit there and think about that positioning.
For sure, for sure. And I think like part of the confusion around alt IDs specifically, and we can talk about alt IDs probably for an hour, Rob, but like alt IDs specifically, I think historically have been used as a way by publishers as a way to try to increase programmatic revenues, right? So you resolve to some alt ID or set of alt IDs, you throw that into the bid stream and you cross your fingers that people will buy because increasingly, buy side platforms are are adopting to the extent that they support these alt IDs, they enable buying and bidding against them. That might help with, indirect revenues. When it comes to data collaboration, I think the relevance of alt IDs is that you can also use them to improve your direct sales efforts and your direct collaboration. I think that's a key point to make. The other thing I wanted to respond to is, you talk about the problem of scale, and I think there's the simplistic kind of mental model that people have of collaboration that it's all about retargeting, right? It's all about, when it comes to activation, it's all about you do a match and then the publisher like enables the brand to target the overlap. And that's certainly a big use case, but there's more that you can do. You can also prospect on behalf of the brand, right? So a really intelligent way to prospect is to use the brand's data as a seed, right? So a brand might have a
Right.
target audience that's built from their own data, and they might want to match that up with you. And then you might actually want to build a model from your own data, which includes non matchable users, right? So you have a body of data some of the attributes you might have on your users, like you might have demographic and interest attributes that you have available for example, all of the people visiting your sites, but you might only have a subset of those people that have given you their email, right? So it turns out you can use collaboration in clean rooms in a way where you match on the subset, and then you can build classifiers on the matchable subset that allow you to build audiences on the total user base that you have that are relevant to the brand and to the buyer. And for example, we call that prospecting, right? So there's retargeting activation, which is kind of your traditional one. But then there's prospecting activation, where you want to do a match and then you want to train a model and evaluate a model on the using the matched users as a seed audience. And so that's one of the clean room applications we've actually automated a workflow for. And I'll briefly show to you in a moment. Before I do that, though, I just want to point out, so you have this private identity graph data. Like, you can do things with that private identity graph data inside of Optable even before you start to collaborate. Like, one of the things you can do is build audiences from it, right? So, I have some audiences here. Some of them are audiences that were built from clean room matches, which I'll show you in a minute. But some of them are built from queries, right? So this one here, for example, is built from a query. This query actually references a prospecting clean room application called Lookalike on MediaCo. And you can see it's actually adding all of the cluster user records that are outputted by this prospecting clean room app, and that have a similarity to this matched user base that's within 50% similar, right? So these are all of the people that are 50%, or that are the top half of similar users from the entire MediaCo user universe when compared to this matched seed audience. So I built an audience from that. I can also build audiences, just from simple trait matches, right? So I have, for example, here a status trait, and I might want to add a condition here that further qualifies the user records that are part of this audience. Now, every time you build an audience, there's a bunch of things you can do right out of Optable with that audience. For one, you can view the subset of your graph that's associated with the users in that audience, right? So this audience is selecting 1.2 million users. You can see, again, the distribution of identifiers associated with those users. You can see the attributes that are attached to those users. And then you can activate this audience right out of Optable through sell-side systems. So integrations with systems like GAM360, Bermuda DMP. We've also got Optable SDKs. These SDKs allow you to do two things. So one thing you can do with them is you can actually collect data from your sites and your apps in real time, user data, that you want to add to your ID graph, right? So you can actually deploy them onto your sites and in your apps and configure those sites and apps as sources of data, which is what I was showing you earlier. But the other thing you can do with them is what you're looking at here, is you can actually target visitors from your site, for example, that belong to an audience that you've got set up in Optable, whether it's a matched audience or one you've built from your own data. And you can target those to key values, which then the SDKs automatically relay to your ad exchange through Prebid. So many ad exchanges support deal-based targeting on key value pairs, and this switch here automates that process. You can very easily, for example, if you have a seed, for example, an index exchange, you can flip this switch, feed a key value pair associated with this audience into index exchange, from where you can then target a deal ID. So this is a way to basically target an audience at the cohort level on the publisher side and enable a buyer to bid up against that audience at the cohort level. And then whether or not you also feed IDs in those ad requests is up to you. You may want to do that or not for a variety of reasons, but you're certainly not required to do that just to activate an audience. The other thing about activation is we've also got plugs into a number of walled garden ad systems and DSPs. So you can see a sample here. where this same audience that I'm activating in my sell side systems, I've also got flowing into my Meta Ads account, my DV360 account, my TikTok account, my Amazon DSP account, and my Trade Desk account. And these are all automatable, right? So you can set these up on a schedule. In this case, I've only done a single export, but when I configure these, I can actually set them up to run daily or weekly or monthly, depending on what I'm trying to do. So for example, here with the trade desk destination, you can see in the schedule section here, I can decide to refresh this audience inside of my trade desk account on a daily basis. And the other thing that happens here, when it comes to the trade desk, is what you can take out into a trade desk audience from Optable is people level data. And so the trade desk, supports maids. It also supports emails and phones, but you have to send them as UID2s. And so that conversion to UID2s is also automated, and it just happens automatically as part of exports. So those are, the audience level capabilities and workflows. And so once you have an audience inside of Optable, whether it's outputted by a collaboration app or a clean room app, as we call it, or whether it's built from your own data, you can do all of these different things with it.
That's great. What I'm almost wondering is, have I thrown you off your demo and all the things you wanted to cover? Are we covering it? Because again, there's so much, and I know with our audience, they're going to follow up with questions, but this seems so straightforward. I'm getting it. It looks great. Looks great. Yeah,
Awesome.
keep
So
going.
let me just show you a couple more things, and then we can, go back to discussion and questions. And if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to take
Yeah.
them. So like the other thing I want to show you is obviously the collaboration, right? And I talked about earlier how it's important to make it easy, especially for common operations you want to do. You really don't want to have your ad ops teams like programming clean rooms. I think that's really, really important. And so what we've done is we've created these different clean room applications. They're all purpose limited, and they all have various controls that allow you to control kind of the amount of information that you exchange with partners. So for example, this insights application here, what it's designed to do is allow you to compare audiences at the aggregate level with one or more partners. So for example, here I have a collaboration with a couple of other partners. And if I click into it, you can see the output of the collaboration is actually a set of reports where I'm able to look at the match rate of my selected audience, which is this TV subscribers audience, and whatever the partner selected. So the workflow for this one is I set it up, I'll select my source audience data, I'll configure the match keys I want to be able to use when performing the match. I'll configure the attributes that I'm interested in seeing insights on in my reports, and my partners will do the same. And the partners are able to accept or reject the invitation. It's always a case by case thing, so they have full control on their side as to how they engage inside this insights collaboration. And what the partners will learn is a similar set of reports. So they're going to learn their overlap in terms of their own data, and they're going to learn insights in terms of their own data. And then what sometimes happens is that, if you're a publisher and you're doing this kind of operation at the beginning of a collaboration, for example, to show a buyer what's possible, right? And maybe to teach them something about their audience that they don't know because they don't have the user data that you have. This is the kind of operation you would do with them. And what you could do is you'll learn these insights and then you can share them with your partner. And you can obviously customize, which subset of the report you share and what it looks like for them. And optionally, they can do the same thing. And a key aspect of these insights clean rooms is that they're privacy preserving. So it's not possible for neither you nor the partners to learn which individual records in these overlaps are actually part of the overlap. So it's a very kind of low risk way to start a collaboration with a partner. It's also a really easy way to do things like lift studies. So for example, here I have an attribution insights report where I'm comparing an exposed list of campaign users with a list of purchasers that's contributed by by the buyer. And you can see the buyer actually shared their results with me, and they have attributes like whether or not the person purchased, whether or not they're a subscriber, and I'm able to understand in this overlap, like what is the distribution of those users in terms of these different attributes. I have different kinds of data, right? I have different attributes, so I'm able to learn, information about the overlap of the purchasers and the exposed users in terms of my attributes, and then I can obviously share this back with the buyer. And what we typically see when you're doing lift is you're going to be doing a couple of these with the buyer, like one that's comparing overlap on a control group, and then one that's comparing overlap on an exposed user group, which is what you see here. So that's insights. Activations enable a publisher to learn which users are actually in the overlap. So for example, here I have an incoming activation that was triggered by a buyer. The match was done just on emails, and you can see it was actually refreshed. So there's a couple of match attempts here. And when a buyer sets these kinds of operations up in Optable, they can also configure them to auto refresh, because typically what happens is data is not static, right? Like you've got user data that's continuously evolving. So if you're actually activating, you want to always be activating on kind of the latest overlaps. Now, what happens here is the match is happening on emails, but I'm the publisher. And so what I'm learning is a destination audience that's built from these matched emails. And if I click into that audience, you'll see now I'm in the audience module. I'm actually accessing an audience that's been built for me from the matched emails. So if I pull up the history tab, you'll see the same two match attempts that we were looking at earlier here. And you can see there's about 35,500 email records that matched. But if I pull up the insights for this audience, I can actually see that I have other data attached to those email records. I have other IDs, I have attributes. And because I have that data, I can then take this audience, into my ad systems, like I showed you earlier, and activate. So I'm going through this a little quickly, Rob, but let me just sort of finish the description of the apps, and then I'm happy to drill deeper in any of these if you're interested. So augmentations, allows you to do something similar to activation, but where you can actually also transfer attributes on overlapping users. So for example, here, this expose and converted operation, what I'm doing is I'm doing a match on using these match keys here and a source audience, which is my exposed campaign users audience, but I'm also transferring a campaign frequency and a campaign exposed attribute only on the matched users to the receiver. In this case, the receiver is AcmeCo, so it's a buyer. So on the buyer side, and I'll show you an example of an incoming transfer. So this one here, AcmeCo, has transferred to me some attributes on users that have been matched with the keys you see here. And as a result of that, I have a destination audience, which again is assembled, from the overlapping user records. And if I pull up the insights for that audience, I can see all of the data I've got hanging on those matched records, plus the new data that's arrived to me from this partner. So again, I'm doing a match, but I'm also transferring additional information associated with users in the match. This is different from an insights operation, right? Where in an insights operation, you're sharing attribute level information, but you're doing it at the aggregate level, and there's no way to learn who's in the overlap. In this operation, one party can actually learn who's in the overlap and can also learn new attributes about the overlapping users. And then finally, prospecting allows what I described earlier, right? So if you're a publisher, what you can do, like for example, in this case here, lookalike on MediaCo, you can configure a prospecting app with a buyer where you configure an evaluation audience. So in the case of most publishers, that'll be everybody. It's all of your users. Right. And then you can configure which attributes on those users you want the model to use, both when it builds the model and when it also scores all of the users in the evaluation audience with respect to their similarity to the matched users. And what happens then, the buyer on their end, they just choose a target audience. So they'll just choose an audience they want to perform a match with. They'll configure the match keys they want to use for matching. And then this app actually executes a match. You can see here there are 35,500 matched records. But then what it does is it doesn't tell you who the matched users are. Instead, it trains this classifier model using the publisher's data. So on the publisher's evaluation audience and attributes, and it allows the publisher here from the report section to build similar audiences from what this model outputs. So for example, here, I can see on this dot here, is approximately 600,000 clusters, so 0.6 million users that are in the 25th similarity percentile. So if I hit this button here to create a prospecting audience, I'm taken inside the audience builder, and you can see in the query editor, it's pre-selected the prospecting app I've just run. It's pre-selected the 25% similar. And then what I can do is I can say, well, I'm only interested in people who are, within the 25th, basically the top 25% of similar users. Add that as a condition, and then hit create, and it'll create that audience with those users, which I can then activate. The user records inside that audience will contain user records that aren't part of the match. They may contain some user records that are part of the match. There's a plethora of privacy protections built into this operation that create what we call a plausible deniability, so that the publisher actually is unable to learn who's in the match. And conversely, the buyer can't learn who's in the match either. So the advantage of doing this operation inside of a clean room app like this is that you can actually build a lookalike audience. The publisher can activate the lookalike audience on behalf of the buyer and target those users without ever learning which of their users are the brand's customers and vice versa, right? So you're reducing the data leakage that is otherwise associated with this kind of operation. And the other thing you can do is if I go back inside the prospecting room, I'm also able to get some level, as the publisher, I can get some level of understanding of which of my selected attributes are actually influencing the model. Now, the amount of understanding I can get is limited because of this privacy protection I talked about earlier. So I don't know, I know, for example, that age equal 55 to 64 is important, but I don't know if it positively or negatively influences the model, nor do I know by how much, right? So I don't know the exact weight. I just know that it's a relevant attribute. And this enables me to kind of debug the traits I'm selecting for the model. And also in cases where observability is important, where you need to kind of know which attributes are affecting the lookalike model for compliance reasons. For example, you're able to see that and then optionally remove them. So these applications, as you can see, that they work underneath the hood. They're built on top of clean room technology, but you as the user, you don't really have to care about that. You just set up the workflows, you pick audiences, you pick attributes. That's the world in which you work. You don't have to write SQL queries. You don't need a data engineer to do this stuff.
That last piece, I think, is the key to unlocking this for publishers. I don't know many that have data scientists sitting around idle waiting for something to work on, right? And I think that there's an aspect that is also, while you went through into the detail of how this works, one of the things that I was very conscious of is that the language in which a buyer and a seller can talk about this can be simplified, right? Like, in other words, let's talk about brand lift. Let's talk about what data you have and so forth. And then let the systems and let the computers do what they do best. Let's roll this up so we're having a conversation around, all right, we're doing this in a privacy compliant way. You're extending our buy beyond our audience, but we're not necessarily saying who, right? But we're starting to doing that. And then, of course, ultimately the conversations will turn toward performance and whatever. And that's where, again, you're going to give the tools for the publisher to be able to go, these are the levers I have by which to adjust those things, right? And from there, look at what other information I need and what other data I need and so forth. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. We want to keep the language, relevant to publishers and brands when they use the system. Uh, Clean rooms as a technology can do a lot of things, but at the end of the day, what's important is like how can you do these things at scale in a repeatable way without a huge amount of cost.
Yeah.
Um, Rob, I want to highlight a couple more things if you don't mind.
No, and then I think we're gonna let you. I want you to pull that together, and we're gonna wrap up. I could go another hour with you with questions, and I don't think anyone wants that. So we'll do another call to go through
We'll
stuff.
do a second impression,
Yes,
if you
exactly.
like.
Yes, there we
Great.
go. There's our new brand. Yeah, please. I want you to make sure you covered what you wanted to cover. So I'll let you go.
Yeah, so just a couple more things. So one thing is this concept of interoperability. I have here, so this is the partnerships module. This is where you invite a partner to collaborate. And you can obviously, when you do that, you can obviously invite what we call enterprise partners. These are other Optable customers, that have their own Optable instances to collaborate with you. But you're also able to invite what we call flash partners. So these are uh, folks you want to collaborate with who are not necessarily Optable customers, but you want to bring them into this environment and enable collaboration with them. So you can invite them by their email address. And then what happens is they'll get an invitation, and I'll show you an example one I've already got here. And basically, it looks like this. Um, so they're presented with a number of different ways they can collaborate with you. So we have this concept of a flash node where the invited partner can access a free instance of Optable that has the capabilities I just demoed to you earlier built into it, has all the clean room apps, has all the source connectors. So if you're working with maybe a D2C brand or someone who's less sophisticated, they've got user data, maybe they've got it sitting in MailChimp and Shopify, a number of different places. They can use this flash node to quickly stitch it together and then build an audience and actually execute a collaboration with you. Again, this is free to them. In order to use this, they have to accept, some T's and C's, which basically tell them that Optable is going to act as a processor of their data because they're, in this instance, they're staging their data inside of Optable, just like you would be as an Optable customer, and they're collaborating with you through that modality. Now, sometimes you're going to be working with partners that are using AWS, for example, and they've got their user data already sitting in AWS, or they've got their user data sitting in Snowflake, for example, and they don't want to move it, right? And
Right.
so what we've done is we've created these connectors to AWS clean rooms, to Snowflake clean rooms. We're launching additional ones as well. As you can imagine, these data warehouse systems and cloud systems are all rolling out clean room APIs. And what we're doing is creating connectors for them. So the AWS connector, basically it allows an invited partner to spin up what we call a connector node, which allows them to orchestrate a clean room operation inside of AWS clean rooms. And we don't have the time today to show you the details of what this looks like. So maybe in the second impressions call, we can do that. But basically, for the invited partner, in the case of AWS, they get access to an interface. That interface provides them with something called a CloudFormation script, which they can then just upload into their AWS account. And when they upload it and run it, the script automates the configuration of an AWS clean room inside of AWS. Now, what's amazing is that on the Optable side, so if you're a publisher using Optable, for you, it's all automated, right? What you do is in the Flash partner settings, you will link up an AWS account of your own to Optable so that Optable can access it. We can provide you with AWS accounts as well if you don't, for example, if you don't have one yourself, but you want to be able to support matching through AWS clean rooms because some of your partners are using AWS. we could provide you with one. And then you basically link it up with your Optable node. And then when these operations are performed, so for example, you'll receive an activation from an AWS customer, an AWS partner, it all looks exactly as if you had received it from an Optable node. So you can see, the match results, the number of
Yep.
records that matched. There's a destination audience that's built up from these matched records. You can pull up the insights of that audience, activate it, export it, etc. So this level of interoperability, what it does is it basically allows your partners to work within the data warehouse system that they're already comfortable with. They don't have to accept Optable as a data processor. They don't have to move their data. Optable doesn't see their data. And it's the AWS clean room that's used to actually execute the operation and enforce kind of the rules of the operation. And we do something very similar with Snowflake. And like I mentioned earlier, we're actively working on launching the same capability with all of the emerging cleanroom service layers. Our goal is really, when we work with a media owner or a publisher, our goal is to give the publisher a suite of tools that really enables growth, and really takes away the complexity of supporting matches through these different environments, because we understand that that's a big pain point. It's costly, it's complicated. So maybe I'll pause here, Rob. I mean, there's other things I can talk about: extensibility of the platform, BigQuery, composing with BigQuery, et cetera, et cetera. But we'll leave that maybe for a
Well,
future session.
I like the idea of us launching a second impressions thing where what we could do is collect some of the questions around and dive, let's find out from our audience which of these elements do it. One of the things that I'll say kind of maybe as a wrap up point to this is we've worked with Optable for some time. You've helped bring the clean room conversation to our community, and to watch some of the evolution of this. Again, I kind of said this up front, but just to watching it. So one of the biggest things that people were like, why would I buy a clean room solution if the buyer's just going to want to use their solution? And to watch that you've addressed that, like, again, it's almost every objection and going and crossing that out to, again, this idea of, I mean, again, I think maybe this is like you and I should do a podcast on this, right? Which is the CDP, DMP, clean room, data collaboration platform, and all of that in terms of how a publisher should look at their offering, right? Like, in other words, this isn't a DMP, right? But if you've got one, it may be the way in which you take that DMP data to market, because again, the privacy things, the connection pieces, the, again, as you're talking to your buyers, as you're talking to them and they're going like, I want this, I want that, or whatever, that flexibility to just be able to kind of work with them in multiple ways. And at the same time, I'm all about the narrative, the publisher controlling your data. If you're truly privacy compliant, you're not giving it away, is I think a key component to it. So Bosco, I'm exhausted. I know you're not feeling 100% under weather, but you got me. Like this was a super deep dive or whatever. Love any last points from you, and also any kind of call to action. If anyone watched this and said, I got to work, I got to like dive in deeper in this, what should they do and who should they talk to?
Yeah, so I appreciate the feedback. We're hyper focused on the advertising industry. We love media owners and publishers. This isn't a static system either. It's evolving. You're going to see and hear a lot more from us over the next few months. Our overarching mission is to help businesses in the advertising world grow. And growth means different things to publishers than it does to brands. We think that privacy safe advertising is an opportunity for growth. So it's not about just being defensive and making sure that you tick all the boxes. It's about leveraging these technologies in order to drive growth in your business. That's what we're about. If you're a publisher and you're interested in this stuff, you can reach out to me directly at Bosco, Bosco at optable.co. You can reach out to our sales at optable.co. We'd love to talk to you. We'd love to learn from you, and hopefully there's something we can teach you as well. So love the chat, Rob.
Yeah,
Thanks for the
yeah. Someone,
opportunity.
if I love that last challenge, if maybe we could teach you something, Bosco, I'm pretty sure you're there. That was, again, I follow, but what I love is how you are taking very complex things and starting to pull it so where I can think through the business application, which is when this is gonna, to your point, gonna take off and things like that. Bosco, thank you so much for that deep dive. Thanks everyone for tuning in to First Impressions. This one's going to be do a second impressions. I'm down for that. And really, again, Bosco, really appreciate your time and thank you.
Total pleasure. Have a nice day.